Hi, I'm Madeline Roth. I'm an editor at Backstage, and I have the pleasure of being here today with Billy Bob Thornton, the star of the Paramount Plus series Landman. Thank you so much for joining us, Billy.
Well, thanks for having me on here.
Of course. First off, congratulations on your newly announced Golden Globe nomination for the show. How did you get the news, and how does it feel?
Well, my publicist called me at 5:16 a.m. We're up in the Central Coast of California with our daughter at college, and we've rented a house, close to the campus. And I've been working pretty steadily ever since January 22nd. I've barely had any time off between Landman and a tour with the band
Mhm.
and a bunch of press. So I just wasn't really thinking about this, and I wasn't really even aware that it was this morning when they would announce that. So when Arnold called me at 5:16 a.m., I was sound asleep and had no idea. So anytime somebody like that calls me that early, I think something's wrong.
Mhm.
So I was kind of freaked out. And then he told me that, and I was relieved. And then I got my bearings a little straighter and then realized that, oh, yeah, Golden Globe, that's awesome.
Well, that's really fun. Well, congratulations again. I'm sure it must also feel pretty great and probably kind of validating for Taylor Sheridan, considering he has said that he wrote this role specifically for you and with you in mind. So I'm curious, when you read that first script, was there any doubt in your mind, or were you immediately confident that I'm the right man, the only man for this part?
Yeah, well, I try to only take roles that are right for me. I mean, I think one of the worst mistakes an actor can make is to do something that's outside their wheelhouse. And, also, I mean, maybe it's not always vanity, but, people who try to, like some guy from, I don't know, Wyoming, decides I'm going to play, Winston Churchill or something. It's like, I don't really do a lot of stuff like that because British guy is going to be a lot better for that role than I am because you're not thinking about an accent or a different culture or anything like that. I appreciate people who put in the work to do it, but I tend to like to do things that I know I'm the guy for. And
Mhm.
Taylor had told me already that he was writing this show based around me, and it's called Landman. And he said, I'm going to write it in your voice and all this kind of thing. So when I read the first couple of scripts, I was like, well, yeah, that's kind of me. So I was very pleasantly, I can't say surprised because, Taylor knows what he's doing about that kind of stuff. And so it was thrilling. And then, he wrote the first few scripts and they had the strikes, they had the SAG and the Writers Guild strikes. And so we were actually going to shoot it a lot earlier than we did because he had to kind of lay off for a while. So, but I think, all these things happen for a reason, and I'm glad that it happened when it did.
Mm. You said you try to only take roles that feel right for you. Like that sense of knowing if a role is right for you, was that something you've always had, or is that something you've developed over the course of your career?
Well, I think I've always had it, but obviously it gets more honed, it gets a little more uh, easy to tell for you over the years. You get better at reading scripts. Um,
Mhm.
but I mean, I'm known for a guy who plays all these different roles, all these weird, very, very different people. But if you think about it, they're still in the wheelhouse.
Mm.
I always tell people if they're doing a movie about Charles de Gaulle, you should get a French guy because he's going to be way better at it than I am. But I have changed up in a lot of roles, but there's still things that I feel that I'm right for.
Hmm. Have you ever said no to something because it didn't feel right for you?
Oh, for sure, absolutely. Yeah, I was asked to play uh, a president once, actually Richard Nixon, and I was like, eh, I don't think so. I'm a guy from Arkansas and Texas and California, and I don't really look like Nixon, or so I would have ended up doing an impression, and I never want to do an impression.
Mm,
I was also asked to play a famous football coach from the 60s once. And I said, you might want a shorter, heavier set Italian guy from the East Coast for that part, you know. So yeah, I don't like to do that. I mean, your best work is going to be when you put a lot of yourself into it. I mean,
hmm.
it stands to reason, you know. And you know, I mean, it's like I said, I appreciate the work and the tricks that people use to get to a certain place, but as far as I can remember, I've never used a prosthetic even. Um, I mean, Sling Blade people assume I did, but I really didn't. That was just all me making that face.
Interesting. Okay, so going back to Landman, there's a lot of oil industry jargon that your character Tommy has to spout off in each episode. How easy or difficult was it for you to kind of get a handle on the technical speak required for this role?
Well, that's always the hardest thing when you're doing a role that does have, you know, the technical language of that particular business.
Mhm.
I played the head of NASA there at in Armageddon and did Pushing 10, where I played an air traffic controller, and on Goliath, I played a lawyer. So
Mhm.
those were the main ones where I had to really dive in deep um, to do that because, you know, audiences are not stupid. They can tell if you're just reciting lines. If you memorize them and recite them, there's not much behind them.
Mhm.
So you have to know what you're talking about. So I've always made it a point. Like, for instance, on Pushing 10, I went to air traffic control school. John Cusack and I did, and actually went through the school
Mhm.
because otherwise you couldn't spout that stuff off. It would not be authentic at all. And so for Landman, we were fortunate enough to have Christian Wallace, you know, who did the podcast that this was based on,
Mhm.
that in the Texas Monthly article. And so Christian was on the set almost every day. And so anything that I wasn't sure about, because I knew some of what it meant. I've known people who worked in the oil business, but there was some stuff that I had no idea exactly what I was saying to somebody. So I would usually go to Christian or Taylor, because Taylor did a lot of research, and I would just ask them, what exactly am I saying to this person? But in terms of, you know, going around and hanging out with oil guys before we shot or anything, I didn't have to do that because those guys were there and really knew it inside out.
Mm. Okay, that's really helpful. So in terms of like research for this role, you didn't have to necessarily embed yourself among actual landmen or people who do this for a living in the oil industry, but just kind of have the right people around you.
Exactly. And although we did have some oil people, you know, on the set, I mean, mostly the guys who worked the rigs and stuff, you know, because
Mm.
it's very important for them to be there for the safety of the actors and everything. But no, in terms of going and living with oil people for a month or something, I didn't do that. There were some landmen around the Fort Worth area that I met
Mm.
during the process, and I would talk to them. But you know, more casual conversation. I think you can actually glean more from a regular conversation with somebody rather than putting them on the spot saying, "Can you teach me, you know, this or whatever?" Because then they kind of stiffen up a little bit. But I got a lot of stuff from these people just talking to them.
Have you gotten any feedback from them about the show?
They love it. They absolutely love it. I mean, we've had so many cards and letters, ladies and gentlemen, uh, telling us that this is the real thing. I mean, it's, you know, it's very authentic, and so that always makes you proud. You know, when you've satisfied the people who actually do it. You know.
Yeah. Yeah, it's got to feel kind of cool for them too, because it's like people are learning about what they do. I mean, I certainly never knew what a landman was or what they do. So they're probably feeling like, okay, now it's like our moment to shine. People know
Right.
what we do now. People know who we are. So
Exactly. Yes, they
yeah,
do
that's
feel
pretty
that way.
cool.
Yeah.
Going back to kind of the technical speak, do you have any advice for actors who may be faced with a similar challenge of having to speak really authoritatively on something that they may not be an expert on?
For sure. I mean, I think it really goes back to what I was saying earlier is you got to learn what everything means. You can't just learn dialogue. You
Hmm.
have to know everything you're saying because when you answer someone or tell them something, you're doing it with an authority. I mean, you're doing it from a place of knowledge, And so I would just say let learning the lines be secondary to learning what they mean, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a great example of like a scene of that from the show is the introduction to your character. Like the first scene, episode one, it's immediately so gripping because your character Tommy is being held hostage by these cartel members and you're having to lecture them and your face is covered the entire time.
Right.
Tell me about shooting that scene and what that was like, specifically, you know, these big chunks of dialogue and you're delivering them without even seeing your face.
Yeah, that was an interesting experience. I can't think of another time when I did that where I was completely covered up with
Mhm.
that much dialogue anyway. And so I actually found it okay because under that hood there were no distractions.
Mhm.
I was just totally by myself there, and I'm dyslexic. I'm severely dyslexic, and so learning lines for me, you would think that it would be very hard, but it's actually kind of the opposite. People who are dyslexic see things differently, and I sort of can speed read, and also I see things in sort of chunks. Uh,
Mhm.
it's kind of hard to explain, but I've always kind of had a knack for learning dialogue fairly quickly, even long monologues, and so in this case, with the thing over my head, I was just in there by myself and I could see it. I could see all those things. Probably the hardest things are numbers.
Mhm.
Those scenes where I'm talking to someone and like when I'm explaining to Kayla Wallace, who plays the attorney,
Mhm.
Rebecca, I'm telling her about all this stuff, what happens when this happens. And then I say, well, in 1912, oil was $30 a gallon at so and so on a 70,000 acre plot where blah, blah, blah. So once you get into numbers, that's where it gets really hard, especially a monologue that's just chock full of them.
Mhm.
But once I got those down, and like I said, I have OCD also. I have dyslexia and OCD. So I was born with all these, what some people might call afflictions, but sometimes they're actually a strength.
Interesting. Okay, so one thing that I really like about this show is that there are plenty of serious moments and lots of real tragedy, but there's also a lot of humor and levity. And so I'm curious, like, how much fun did you have playing this character who's obviously very stressed and reasonably so, but also kind of quippy and funny too?
Well, that's what you pray for. I mean, when you get a role, you always want somebody who's, got different colors to them. I mean, I never had a lot of interest in playing like the hero who's just good all the time
Mhm.
or the bad guy who's just bad all the time. You know what I mean? It's like you want somebody who has a lot of aspects to their personality, and that's real life. And I think sometimes these days critics will say like if you have a movie or a show that has drama and humor and other other uh, human behaviors in it, they'll say, well, it couldn't make its mind up what it was. And it's like, well, that's to say that real life can't make its mind up what it is, because in real life, during the course of a day, every day, you'll have all those things. You'll have
Mhm.
sadness and joy and depression and great joy and and humor. and drama. I mean, that's how humans live, that's what we do. And so a part like this is a dream because, if Tommy Norris was just some guy who was just stern and over earnest all the time and, a nervous wreck, then, nobody can breathe. And I think it's a great thing that I have to say I enjoyed the humor, and there, I mean, that's the bottom line. I really loved the humorous bits in there from not only myself but everybody. And I thought they all did a great job. I loved working with Allie and Michelle and Jacob and Colum, and James Jordan. I mean, all of them. It was just really a treat. I loved that cast. I loved the crew, and of course we had John Hamm and Demi Moore, and Demi and I are old friends from a long time, over 30 years, and so it was great to be there with her. I didn't have as much with her as uh, advertised, maybe. And most of the time when I'm talking to John, it's on the phone, but I still had a great time with them. And by the way, I just to throw this in there, um, a landman is on the phone a lot. So that's a realistic thing because their whole day is driving around to different oil sites.
Hmm.
So they do their business in the truck on the way to all these places. And so it wasn't just done uh, saying, oh, let's just shoot it on the phone. It was for a specific reason.
Yeah. Yeah, Tommy constantly on the phone, constantly driving.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's the job, I guess. I'm sure you were jealous of John Hamm, who like half of his scenes are on a golf course or by a pool,
Yeah,
or like
right.
an air-conditioned office
Oh
and
yeah. I mean, traditionally, I don't get that stuff. I never get the parts that shoot in Hawaii. I'm always in like freezing cold in Wisconsin or Minnesota or Canada or out there in 110-degree weather in West Texas desert. Yeah.
is that by choice? Are you kind of addicted to the pain of these roles or something?
Well, I think it's a little of both. I mean, I just happen to have gotten that as my luck of the draw over the years. I just happened to get those parts. But also, I think sometimes the terrain, the weather conditions, things like that, actually become a character and they become part of your character. They really, I mean, the more in pain I am, the more at home I feel. More about that later.
You mentioned that this show has gotten really good reviews. It's also, Paramount said last week that it has hit a new ratings record, I think, for Paramount Plus, which, may not be all that shocking considering Taylor Sheridan has this great track record. So now that you've seen it firsthand, what do you think makes his shows so successful?
Well, I think first of all, it's very realistic, and I think you can sense that about it when you watch it. I
Mm.
think they're interesting characters. I can't remember who it was, some smart guy years ago, George Bernard Shaw or somebody like that uh, said that there are only two stories: a magic frog in an ordinary garden, or an ordinary frog in a magic garden. And so, in other words, like the strongest things to me are simple stories with complex characters. And I think people like that about this. And also, it shows a world that you really don't see often in the movie business. I mean, one of my favorite movies from the old days was Giant with Rock Hudson and Elizabeth Taylor and James Dean. And so uh, this is kind of like a Giant if um, David Lynch were producing it or something.
Hmm.
In a way. I mean, because Giant was more straightforward, in the time that it was made. But it's like Giant with cursing.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Lots of cursing. Maybe some more like bikinis, things like that. Yeah, yeah.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Um, there's this speech. in the second episode of Landman that Tommy gives to his daughter, and it's all about he's talking about dreamers and losers. They're like sitting at the kitchen table. He's talking about dreamers and losers, and he talks about his admiration for people who take risks, and he's telling his daughter, you gotta learn how to fail. And I was wondering if that resonated with you in this industry at all, because, a lot of actors, especially ones who are early in their career, like our audiences, they have to kind of have that dreamer mentality. So, and like learn how to handle failure. So is it something that resonates with you as an actor at all?
For sure. I mean, I grew up in the music business and I came to LA to play music in 1980. And it was sort of the hair band scene and punk, which was more my speed. But, um, one thing led to the next, and the next thing you know, I'm broke and I'm out in LA. And I spent years and years, most of the 80s, failing. And people say, well, why didn't you just give up and go home? I said, well, what am I going to go home to? I played music on the weekends and I worked at a sawmill and for the highway department. I mean, it's not like I have anything to go home to. Somehow you have to think that tomorrow is the day all the time, which is what I did. As bad as things got for me, uh, I I think the failures actually fueled me. Uh, I think I had not a chip on my shoulder, but I think I was very driven by failure. And plus, I'd never had a lot of encouragement, growing up. And the two people that encouraged me, I wasn't even in acting, but I took a drama class in high school. And just because I thought, well, maybe I'll get a decent grade in something, I think that this should be, easy enough. And there's this woman named Maudie Treadway, who was the acting teacher in the drama department in school. She said, I think you could actually do this. She said, I think you're good at this. And most of my students are just in here to pass the time.
Hmm.
And I never considered it. I never thought about it again after that. But I did remember her, and I ended up being a pallbearer at her funeral. And just that encouragement meant a lot to me. When I got to LA, I ended up in this acting class because a friend of mine out there said, you ought to get in this class. I think you could do this. And the teacher, once again, a guy named John Whitlock, he encouraged me. He called me outside of class one night and he said, I think you have a future in this. And I think more so than some of the other people that I have in here, because I think you really have a knack for this. And I think you have the desire. And so the only time I didn't play music was in the mid to late 80s because I didn't start back till the 90s because I had to keep my head above water. So I started getting these little parts, like on Matlock or Knots Landing or, things like that.
Mhm.
And I made enough money to not starve to death doing that, or well, in between them, I starved to death. But all those hard times, I look back on them now as great times. And because that was the development of all this stuff. I mean, you don't have any stories if your life is easy. And I think actors need to have stories to be good actors. I think your history as a person is actually your education as an actor. That's the way
Hmm.
I look at it. I think it's more valuable than acting classes is just experience in life. You mentioned dreamers. I think you always have to be a fan of other people, whether it's the people you grew up watching or your peers. You have to be a fan, and you have to keep dreaming. If you stop dreaming, you die as an artist, I believe. So even at my age, I still dream. I act like I'm every time I do a project, I act like it's my first one. I mean, I try to have, or not try, I have the same excitement that I did when I got my first role in something.
Hmm.
And so you just have to look at failure as just part of your development and let that fuel you as opposed to discourage you.
That's great advice, and it's really cool to hear about the people who championed you along the way. And I'm sure, like you said, being a fan of other people and being encouraging to other people, being a champion of other people, that goes a long way because you never know who you're gonna help. by doing
Oh,
that. So
for sure. Every
yeah.
day when I wake up, I do a meditation and I go through all of my family and my friends and say these little meditations for them. And uh, part of what I do, and they say this helps. I know this gets a little bit hippie like, but I grew up as a hippie. So, but I thank sort of the universe out loud every day, you
Mm.
know, because I don't look at this lightly. I mean, any success that I've had in any of the fields of music or movies or anything, I appreciate it every day. I mean, I've been able to take care of my family and do something that I love, and that's a pretty fortunate person right there. So I'm thankful every day for this stuff. And so somebody said to me today about a friend of mine said, "Well, what do you think about this Golden Globe thing? Is this is what your fifth or sixth nomination or something like that?" And I said, "Well, if you go do something that you believed in." And you give it your all, and the fact that somebody noticed it feels good. I mean, people always say you don't do it for awards. Obviously, you don't do it for awards. You do it for. I didn't expect, I never expect awards, but uh, the fact that the people around you uh, appreciated the work you did, especially when it's difficult work. Uh, you just count your lucky stars.
Yeah. So being the leading man of a show like Landman and then Goliath before this, like what would younger you think of that? Like was that ever an aspiration for you?
Well, it's funny because when I was coming up, TV was a bad word. You were supposed to just do movies. And so once I became a movie star guy, uh, that's all I was supposed to stick with forever. And so I was a little late to the game for the streaming shows and all that. And everybody kept telling me, this is the future. And I said, yeah, but it's TV, isn't it? Well, then I did Fargo and I was like, hang on a second, this is not TV, is it? And so I got it right there because I had held out. I'd been offered a couple of series over the years before that. And I had seen things like The Sopranos and things like that, and I enjoyed them very much. But I just thought that I would be perceived differently if I did that. And then I wake up one day and people would rather do that than they had be in the movies. I mean, it's
Yeah.
like this is the place to be. Actors want to be here. I mean, you can make a great living doing it, and and there's no censorship because essentially the only difference in movies and TV, even network TV coming up, was that I mean, some of the methods were very different, but it was really censorship. It's like you couldn't do what you wanted to on TV to fully tell the story,
Hmm.
cursing, sex, violence, whatever it happened to be. And so on a streaming show, if you're on Paramount doing one of these, you do whatever you want to do. It's just like a 10-hour movie. So
Hmm.
once I got that into my head, after I did Fargo and Goliath, I completely got it. It was like, oh, okay, I understand why actors and directors want to be here now. Because have you ever heard a director say, I want my movie to be shorter? No, no. So now directors have the chance to, or producers, writers, actors who want to develop a character over a period of time, they can do a 10-hour movie.
Hmm.
And who wouldn't love that?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I you know, being a lead on this show and being the lead, I'm curious, like, does being first on a call sheet make you approach a job differently? Like, do you show up to set with a different mentality?
In a way, yes. One of the things when you're carrying the show and you're the lead guy, people around you look to you, and especially I think because I have been a writer and director,
Hmm.
uh, so I obviously Taylor is the head of it, and then Stephen Kay and Michael Friedman, who also direct on the show, who are wonderful. All three of those guys are great, and obviously the actors and the crew look to them for things. If the lead person of any show is aloof and shows up to the set like they're more important than everybody else, then you're done for. Uh, Other people don't do their best work, and you don't want people around you who you feel are not doing their best work, because then obviously you're not going to do yours. And I've always been, I mean, I saw one time, when you get on the internet and you're looking up something, I don't know, where can you buy a Bozo the Clown nose or whatever. And then the next, and the next thing you know, there's this other article after it. And it's like, wait a minute, how'd I get here? But human nature makes you curious, right? So it's, like the 10, you know, most difficult people on a movie set, and so you look at it and you go, huh, I wonder if any of my friends are on this. I was on one time, and I was so shocked by it because, and I'm not bragging on myself, I'm just saying my nature is I'm a pretty friendly guy, pretty open, and I always, I'm real friendly with the crew. I hang out with the crew, sometimes even more than the actors. And we had a brilliant crew on this. And uh, you know, I was like very puzzled by that, and maybe just somebody who maybe I ran over somebody's cat. I don't know what happened, but anyway, they put me on this list. But one way or the other, when I go to the set, I make sure that everybody there knows that I'm no more important. I'm no more important than anybody else there. Uh, and from craft service people to a camera operator to a day player, whoever it is, you got to go around and make yourself known to people and let them know, hey, you can relax. I'm just this dude, you know. And I enjoy being there, and I also like to, make a little bit of lighter atmosphere on set. Uh, so, like I said, people do their best work then. You make people comfortable. So I love being there, and I love the people I work with. And the only times I've ever gotten upset on a set were when somebody was mistreating somebody. Like I don't like people, whether it's a director or an actor or who, like yelling at people on the set. When I direct, that's one of our rules. Nobody yells at anybody around here, and especially in front of people. That's disheartening to people. If you have
Mhm.
a problem with somebody, you call them aside and do it privately. Um, and you also don't yell directions out across the set, or at least that's the way I do it. I mean,
Mhm.
actors don't want to be directed in front of like 200 extras.
Yeah.
No, I mean, it's like you got people in there, the whole background actor, bunch who's there. I mean, and all of a sudden it's like, hey, you're not giving it enough energy. Can you do this and that and the other? It's like nobody wants to hear that.
Mm.
And if I think I can have any advice for, say, a younger actor or something, I just call them aside and I say, hey, look, what you might want to try is this. Just give it a shot. If you don't like it, don't worry about it. But so, yes, to answer my long-winded answer to your question is yes, when you're the lead of a show, it's your responsibility to be the leader of the people, um, in the sense that you make everyone feel comfortable and you give them the confidence to do it. Yeah,
Yeah. Sounds like you set the tone for the show.
for
So,
sure, you have to.
yeah.
And
Um,
sometimes the tone is set by people who set a bad tone, and I've been there. I've seen it. It's not fun.
yeah, then you gotta try to counteract with the good tone. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Well, we've got to wrap up in a minute, but lastly, I have to ask you because it's December.
Hmm.
You're in some people's favorite holiday movies, Love Actually, Bad Santa. Do you have any desire to add to the collection? Do another holiday movie someday?
Well, there's a possibility. I mean, there's been some talk about doing a Bad Santa 3. I mean, I don't know if it's real talk yet, but there has been some talk about it. But I love doing the holiday movies, and I couldn't be in two more opposite kinds of holiday movies. I mean,
Yeah,
Love
true.
Actually is like this romantic kind of like, feel good, tearjerker kind of Christmas movie, and then Bad Santa, as we know, set off a chain of, bad bedpost, bad roof, bad mom, bad grandpa, and So it's become like a Christmas classic. I have people come up to me sometimes saying every year they watch It's a Wonderful Life and Love Actually and Bad Santa. And I go, boy, that's you talking about three different movies.
Yeah, yeah. It's quite
Yeah.
a triple feature. Well, maybe in the meantime, you can do a holiday episode of Landman. Santa's sleigh gets stranded in Texas. He needs oil for it,
Exactly. Oh,
recruits
for
Tommy.
sure. Yeah. And then
Yeah.
Santa comes sliding down the oil rig.
Yeah, exactly. There you go. Talk to Taylor about it. Perfect
You
pitch.
got it.
Well, thank you so much for being here today, Billy,
Thank
and
you.
congratulations again on the Golden Globe nomination. And I'm looking forward to seeing the rest of season one.
Oh, cool. Well, thank you. Thank you for having me on here. It was really nice.